Hey there, Jabik here. A lot of you guys shared your theories in the comments of my last video, and so many of them are interesting and fun to think about. So that's what we're gonna do today. I've looked through the comments and have chosen several theories that I think are worth examining in detail. And I'm sorry if yours doesn't end up in here, there were a lot of comments. In the end, there's no one right answer unless Nintendo gives an official timeline declaration at some point, which they very well might, we'll have to see. But until then, let's let our imaginations run wild. Don't let me or anyone else tell you your headcanon is wrong. There's so many ways to interpret these things. I say go with whatever leads you to have the most fun with these games. Without further ado, let's begin. The Rocket Doctor says, I think for me the most likely option is that the original Hyrule fell at some point, in my perfect world when the three timelines became one. And then Rauru eventually refounded the kingdom, which is where Zelda is sent back to. This was a pretty common one among commenters, and it would solve any potential problems with the timeline. If it's true, then well, case closed. It's not my cup of tea personally because it's too easy. Nevertheless, there is of course some evidence for this theory. The hero's aspect, for example. I didn't even know this thing existed when I made my last video, but it has some very interesting lore implications. As a reward for completing all shrines, you get an item that transforms you into this guy. This is the hero from Impa's Calamity Tapestry. Impa even says so indirectly. So the hero that sealed Calamity Ganon away 10,000 years ago was a Zonai. What does this mean? Either the Zonai were still around as a civilization en masse 10,000 years ago, or this hero is an anomaly. I think the most logical implication that Nintendo are hinting towards with this strange item is the former. That the Zonai were still hanging around Hyrule 10,000 years ago and the hero's incarnation just happened to be born a Zonai. If that's the case, then Hyrule's founding under Rauru couldn't take place near the beginning of the timeline. Otherwise, the Zonai civilization would have had to appear, go extinct, and then reappear thousands of years later, which isn't likely. This item, as far as I can tell, is the best evidence that thousands of years after all these games, Hyrule fell and then was refounded. If this is so, would it not make sense that Tears of the Kingdom potentially takes place in the hero is defeated timeline? Seeing as in this timeline Hyrule becomes a shell of its former self and just maybe dies out entirely? But I mean, it's so complicated. Here's another question. The Imprisoning War. Does this refer to a single event or two? I don't think the words Imprisoning War were written so many times into Tears of the Kingdom script without understanding the lore implications of that phrase. The Imprisoning War was first referred to in A Link to the Past, but the details don't match up with Tears of the Kingdom's Imprisoning War. This one is said to have happened during the events of Ocarina of Time. So are we just supposed to assume that there were two Imprisoning Wars thousands and thousands of years apart? Why wouldn't Nintendo just call it something different? Or is this telling us something else? Adrian Hall says, also worth noting that in both Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, the sacred springs of power, wisdom, and courage are all identical to their appearance in Skyward Sword, if remarkably aged due to the timescales involved. And the Forgotten Temple, though in considerable disrepair, is the same layout of the Temple of Hylia, right down to the Life Tree, albeit halfway across Hyrule for some reason. Undeniably, Skyward Sword is related in some manner, with the aforementioned sacred sites, but also the Lanayru Promenade using the distinctive Skyloftian architecture. Skyward Sword has definitely received preferential treatment in its various connections to Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. I mean, let's look at a few. As previously mentioned, the springs of wisdom, power, and courage are undeniably the same places they were in Skyward Sword. Thi's voice can be heard in the Master Sword. The Mother Goddess statue from Skyloft is found in the Forgotten Temple, and if you complete the quest to prop the Mother Goddess statue back to its proper position, you receive the White Sword of the Sky, which is the Goddess Sword. The sword you wield prior to forging it into the Master Skyward Sword. The sword you wield prior to forging it into the Master Sword in Skyward Sword. I'm saying the word sword too many times. I had never before heard that the Lanayru Promenade features distinctive Skyloftian architecture, so I took a stroll down there and did some comparing. Hi there, it's Jabik with low-quality microphone here. And yeah, it does seem like they do share some similar iconography. I would interpret this to mean that either the civilization that built the Lanayru Promenade and similar ancient sites either predates Skyward Sword, or was built by the people of Skyloft shortly after settling the surface. Is all this simply bias on the part of the developers, seeing as it's the game they created most recently apart from Breath of the Wild? I imagine much of the development team is the same, and it's clear they harbor a lot of love for that particular entry in the series. From the various references found in the world to game mechanics like the paraglider and the stamina wheel, and especially Tears of the Kingdom's focus on exploring the sky. But what if all these things are supposed to point us towards some conclusions about Breath of the Tears of the Wild Kingdom's timeline placement? Jin the Blue says, I think there's a case to be made that Tears of the Kingdom takes place in a timeline split created by Skyward Sword. Specifically the part of the canon where the goddess statue fell on the imprisoned, killing him. Meanwhile, the timeline we know is the one where Link went back and bested the Demon King. This would make the Tears of the Kingdom imprisoning war at the same place on the timeline as Ocarina of Time, just parallel to it, shortly after the Sheikah fight off malice with tech derived from Zonai devices. Then 10,000 years where Calamity Ganon is an on and off threat. Finally, Yiga insurgents kill a Zelda before they can learn sealing magic, while unearthing Sheikah tech and Breath of the Wild happens. The reason I say it's the one where the goddess statue lands and crushes Demise is because we actually have that goddess statue in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, but nowhere else. That's right, I completely forgot. Skyward Sword also features time travel, and if Ocarina of Time's rules still apply, that means there has to be another timeline split. This is probably my favorite theory that I hadn't considered, that Tears of the Kingdom isn't a merging of all three timelines, but an alternate one that is parallel to the other games. What if this Ganondorf isn't a different person to this Ganondorf, but is the same person who exists at the same point in time in different timelines? So is this guy right? Does Tears of the Kingdom take place in the timeline where Link uses the Triforce to cause the goddess statue to land onto the surface and destroy Demise before he can return? I think so. Like he said, the goddess statue is nowhere to be found in the sky, where it would still logically be if it never crashed down to Earth. It's hidden away in the Forgotten Temple. It is interesting that this goddess statue is still in possession of the goddess sword, though that's not necessarily canonical. It may just be a cool reference. But if this is the goddess statue that destroyed Demise in the timeline where Link does not have to duel him, the goddess sword should not exist as it was used to forge the Master Sword. In the past, in the timeline where Link has to fight Demise one-on-one, Link uses the Master Sword to absorb Demise's consciousness and seal him away, then goes back to the future. So in that past timeline, the goddess statue still exists in the sky, and the goddess sword, which contains Fi, presumably never became the Master Sword. This would explain why, if all the other games in the series take place in this timeline, the Master Sword never speaks, as it does to Zelda in Breath of the Wild. So this theory posits that in the timeline where Link uses the Triforce to destroy Demise with the goddess statue, Link and Zelda did their thing after the events of Skyward Sword, Hylians returned to the surface, and eventually the Zonai descended from the sky. And around the time when Ocarina of Time would be taking place in the other timeline, Ganondorf is imprisoned by Rauru. Thousands of years go by, calamities occur cyclically. 10,000 years ago, a Zonai hero wielded the Master Sword and, with the help of the advanced Sheikah civilization, sealed Ganon away. And then the events of Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom occur. I think that works. I think that's brilliant. The only challenge to that theory I would offer is that we saw artifacts from an advanced civilization that originated in the sky in Twilight Princess, didn't we? The city in the sky. Reminds you of something, don't it? Look at that fan technology. This has got to be Zonai in origin, right? The same civilization in the sky we see in Tears of the Kingdom. So this would lead me to believe that all the sky ruins we explore in Tears of the Kingdom exist at the time of Twilight Princess as well. This would mean they'd have to be in the same timeline because those ruins were only lifted into the sky to preserve them for Tears of the Kingdom Link. At the very least, the Zonai must exist in both timelines. The city in the sky in Twilight Princess is home to the Uka, however. All sky civilization-related things also relate to the Uka, but they've got to have a connection to the Zonai, right? What are these things? Why are these things? Are these things the evolved descendants of the Zonai? Did the Zonai keep these things as pets, perhaps? I don't know. I don't like to think about them. Overall, though, I think the Skyward Sword timeline split is the most logical theory of the bunch that answers the most questions. There were some other fun theories, though, that I want to feature. So let's do that while we're here. Triple W Wario says, in my head the Zonai did exist sometime very, very early on, even before Skyward Sword. The Zonai has two main symbols they use, a swirl with a little tail at the end and a square swirl. These swirls can be seen many places throughout the games, on the doors of the sand ship, on the fused shadow, in the Tower of the Gods, etc. They worked for the gods in aiding the heroes to come. Godon in the Tower of the Gods is a Zonai construct. The square swirls are all over the boss chamber and Godon itself, and it shares the same design as the constructs. I also believe that the fused shadow was a Zonai device made with Zonai technology, judging by the mask's design. I believe they were sent from the gods very early on, had advanced technology, and somehow disappeared. Then the timelines somehow merged together a long time after Adventure of Link, Four Sword Adventures, and Spirit Tracks. Thousands of years passed, the timelines merged, and Hyrule fell in some catastrophic event. Perhaps the depths in Tears of the Kingdom is the ancient remains of Hyrule. The Zonai then returned somehow with their advanced technology. Their civilization flourished, and they founded the new Hyrule together with Zelda's descendant Sonia. The Sheikah was still around, and the Sheikah learned this advanced technology from the Zonai, which is why their attacks look very similar in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, only that the Zonai is even more advanced. Rauru got named after the ancient light sage who built the second Temple of Time back in the ancient ages, and he built a new Temple of Time. Ganondorf was then reborn again, and Rauru sealed him below Hyrule Castle and died in the process. X amount of years pass, the Zonai are gone, but the Sheikah remain and have learned advanced tech from the Zonai, which allowed them to make divine beasts, guardians, etc. Ganondorf's hatred manifested and escaped as Calamity Ganon, and the big war happens. The Tears of the Kingdom memories take place long after the last games of the timeline, after Hyrule fell, and shows a time where the ancient Zonai has returned and taught the Sheikah tribe their technology. The ancient Hyrule of myth lies buried deep below the earth. The Zonai has existed since the beginning, and evil Zonai were the interlopers who became the Twili, hence the Twili's green magic, similar symbols, and anti-grav and light technology. The good Zonai made the Tower of the Gods, as well as the robots in Skyward Sword due to their blue electric magic holding them together, just like Zonai constructs, as well as the Zonai symbols in the Sand Ship. The ancient times where the Skyward Sword robots were active, it was the time of the first Zonai. Yeah, I've never beaten Wind Waker, so I didn't know Godon was a thing, but yeah, that is definitely a Zonai construct in the Tower of the Gods dungeon. In fact, doesn't this boss arena look a lot like a Shrine of Light used to test the hero's mettle in Tears of the Kingdom? And the dungeon as a whole resembles Zonai architecture, including these construct-like statues. That is an excellent thing to consider, thank you for pointing it out. And considering the fact that Skyward Sword receives preferential treatment in references to this game, those robots definitely mean something, right? Zonai! Zonai! Jax Thomas says, I think Tears of the Kingdom can fit fine enough into the current timeline. In fact, one of the more reputable Zelda wiki updated their timeline with events related to Tears of the Kingdom. I'm gonna try and explain how I interpret Tears of the Kingdom fitting into the timeline. Zonai Rauru descends from the sky during the era of prosperity. The Zonai were probably living in the sky like the people of Skyloft, but away from them. And the Zonai probably also made those robots that were in Skyward Sword. At this point, Hyrule was an area of land where several settlements existed, but it wasn't until Sonia and Rauru that this was made into a true kingdom. Tears of the Kingdom, Ganon does his thing, gets sealed by Rauru. This is why for a fairly long amount of time following the era of prosperity, Ganon just doesn't show up, i.e. the Force era Hero of Men, Minish Cap, Four Swords. In the first few cutscenes, it seems like TOTK Ganondorf's body was being reactivated in a sense, almost like it was brain dead, and that the gloom was going back into him. It looks like he's not exactly dead, but not really alive either until the hand falls. My interpretation of this is that eventually, after centuries of the spirit or hatred of demise reincarnates into Ocarina of Time Ganondorf and leaves TOTK Ganondorf's body under the castle and will return later. Now some might say that having two Ganons at one time doesn't make sense, but there literally has been an instance of two Ganons being around at the same time. In Breath of the Wild, Calamity Ganon was in Hyrule Castle and TOTK Ganondorf was far below it. Either they are one and the same, meaning my idea about the soul being able to leave the sealed body to do other things is valid, or they are different, meaning there was two different Ganons around at the same time. Some also might say that the Calamity is just a mindless puppet. However, Calamity Ganon isn't totally mindless. It is referred to as cunning by multiple characters for knowing about the guardians and divine beasts, and being able to control them. I know there is a mistranslation related to Dark Beast, but regardless, Calamity still chose to turn into Dark Beast. meaning that it cannot be that mindless if it is able to make that choice. And remember, every incarnation of Ganondorf is Ganon in the main Zelda universe. This could also lend credence to the theory that two Links can be alive at once, i.e. the Hero of Worlds and Gramps, who is very likely Link from A Link to the Past. On to the topic of both Rarus. Twilight Princess talks about the era of chaos, which was before the era of prosperity, where the interlopers tried to invade the sacred realm to get to the Triforce. To protect the Triforce, someone named Raru built a new Temple of Time at the location of the Sealed Temple, around the pedestal holding the Master Sword, the location of the only entrance to the sacred realm. He placed the Triforce in the Temple of Light and sealed off the sacred realm. This can be explained one of two ways. First, the Raru that sealed away the Triforce is the Zonai one who did so while coming into very limited contact with Hylians. This Zonai Raru is different from the Ocarina of Time Raru. The second possibility is that there were two Rarus around. The Hylian one that sealed away the Triforce and was then in Ocarina of Time, and the Zonai King. Personally, I think the second one is more plausible. Also, I don't remember if this is totally true, but I think somewhere it said that Raru sealed himself away in the Sacred Realm along with the Triforce. It would explain how he lived so long for a Hylian and matches more with the second possibility. Now, I'm personally of the opinion that the three timelines at some point merge and lead to the events of 10,000 years before Breath of the Wild. What is my source?
Source! My source is I made it up.
In all seriousness, I feel like if they can get away with the downfall timeline existing without ever explaining it in a game, this is probably an equally viable scenario. Then, after Calamity Ganon is defeated in Breath of the Wild, the Spirit of Demise re-enters TOTK Ganondorf's body, and the current events of Tears of the Kingdom happen. On the Rito, I believe it's very possible that after the era of prosperity, they either went extinct or went to live up in the mountains away from Hylians. That is very true. A Link to the Past's hero is in fact alive at the same time A Link Between Worlds hero is alive, meaning that multiple incarnations of these three figures can exist at once. Or maybe it's not so much that Demise and Hylia and the hero are incarnated into individuals, but rather their spirits or goals or something sort of possesses whoever in the world best embodies them. Thank you for this excellent theory. Virgiornos says, another thing to keep in mind is that in Breath of the Wild, it was revealed that Zelda had all three pieces of the Triforce. So somehow, at some point in time leading up to the events in Breath of the Wild, all three Triforces joined the Wisdom Triforce in one bloodline, which means that Tears of the Kingdom Ganon never had nor wanted to obtain the power of the Triforce. But they do have Spirit Stones, which Tears of the Kingdom Ganon does want. So, yeah, very good point. It is kind of a mystery how pretty much the only appearance of the Triforce in Breath of the Tears of the is when Zelda uses it to seal away the calamity. And with that, I think we're gonna leave it there for today. There were a ton of good theories in the comments, and maybe this video helped you develop yours more. I'm gonna be thinking about the story of this game and all these interesting angles to come at it while I kill bokoblins with orbital space lasers for a long time coming. Thank you, truly thank you to everyone who commented and especially everyone who subscribed. I'm gonna be honest, I expected to get like 50 views on my last video, but it did insanely well. I am planning on uploading another video soon. Probably next week, though. I mean, maybe I shouldn't say that, because that's like a commitment. And like, I'm not good at commitments, so... And it's a video I've been working on for a long time, so stay tuned if you're interested in that. One more time, thank you for watching. I hope we meet again.